as I'm hoping we're all seeking to grow spiritually, one of the underlying questions that we all need to wrestle with is, who is this Jesus? And it's, you know all of the answers that you probably should give. I'm not talking about an intellectual answer. I'm talking about an answer that comes from our hearts, because that's going to be my theme tonight, about opening our hearts. And it's not a question that we just answer once and then it's finished. For me, and I think for most of us growing spiritually, it's a question we continually struggle with. Who is this Jesus? Because that's what the early Christians had to struggle with. Most of the early Christians, as I'm sure you all know, were Jewish. So how did they come to believe that in this person, Jesus of Nazareth, was the very presence of God? Think about it. We heard the almost powerful readings tonight, that the God of all creation, can you imagine that? The God who created the world, the heavens and the earth, and us humans in God's image, that God was in the presence of Jesus of Nazareth. The God that brought the Israelite people out of bondage in Egypt through the Red Sea, that great Exodus reading, that was in the person of Jesus. And then that God that rains down from us all of the waters of life, again, not just natural waters, but all of the things that satisfy the thirsts of our lives that many times we seek to satisfy in inappropriate ways, that was in the person of Jesus. What convinced them that this Jesus was that God? And what will convince us? Well, it was the resurrection. That Jesus did things that only God could do. Rising from the dead, all of the miracles, feeding the multitudes, raising up others from the dead. Only God can do that. And they saw that in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Do we see that? Do we see that? And again, I'm not looking for an intellectual answer, because we answer that by the way we live our lives. Now we have the choice of living our lives professing Jesus as this God and ordering our life more in His direction. That's our saying yes. Or we can say no, where we order our lives more around ourselves. So who is the center of our universe? Is it the Lord Jesus, or is it ourselves and our own ways? There's a tension, again, that I don't think can be answered just once and for all. It's an answer we continually, daily struggle with, because it calls us to change. If the resurrection, this feast, does anything for us, I think it's encouraging us to open our hearts for this greater coming of this God of ours in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, crucified and risen. Now, as we open our hearts, God's going to ask us to change. And I don't think any of us like to change. You know, I have often said this. I pray all the time, Lord, I want to be closer to you, but I don't want to change. I'm very comfortable with the way I am. You know, I heard a story this week about a woman that was constantly badgering her husband to go to the doctor, get his eyes tested, and he resisted. How many of us resist when we need to check something and we don't want to do it? But he finally went to the doctor and he got new glasses and he could just see life so much better. How many of us like our houses, the furniture rearranged? I like to walk for exercise and I wear clothes that are not even considered rags. Because they're comfortable. I like them. This last week I had to do a pit stop at McDonald's. And one lady said, you know, your knee is sticking out? Why don't we all have old clothes that we just love, but they're wavy? We don't want to change. Well, that's what this is inviting us to do. To let God into our lives. Because we're called to make an act of faith. most people expect that if I let God in my life, nothing wrong is going to happen. It doesn't happen that way. That's not life. But that was the word today. That the Israelites in Egypt in slavery still knew God was with them. If you're going through tough times in your life, whatever it is, health or money or relationship problems or whatever, and life is, in a sense, falling apart, somehow, with the faith in Jesus as risen, we know God is somehow there. Not just in the good times. Now, as that God comes into our hearts and helps us with all of the events of life, then we begin to see with eyes of faith that we're not just in it for ourselves. That as God comes closer to us, God changes us. Look at the early disciples. They eventually discovered they weren't in it for themselves. And what did they do? They went out on mission. They went out to help others. They found out that by helping others, they were lifted up. Because the resurrection is not just for the end of this life, it's for us tonight, right here. And the more that we let God into our lives and are convinced that in our problems we can help others, the more we're going to be better and the world's going to be better. How many people are going through tremendous grief? Maybe some of you have done that recently, where a loved one is gone, and you don't know how to get through it. Many people have discovered by going and helping others grieving, it helps them. And then they are benefit, and the world becomes better. And you can substitute any problem. If you have an addiction, many times helping others with the same addiction helps yourself. People going through a divorce, or people who've had abortions, and helping others in the same situation, they are lifted and realize that they're still loved and God is still with them. By opening the door of our hearts, we make the world a better place in which to live. That's why our Social Justice Commission, all through Lent, we were talking about this very same theme. And so we had our logo made, opening our hearts, a better world for all. That's what the resurrection hopefully does for us. By opening our hearts, where our life becomes better, we make the world better. That's the resurrection. That's what Jesus invites us to. That's what we celebrate at this